Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
This is what billions in black budget funding gets you, Dr. Miranda Hayes announced, unlocking a biometric seal on the refrigerated storage unit with a theatrical flourish. The laboratory deep beneath the Langley Research Complex hummed with cutting-edge technology, most of it undocumented in any public record. Though I suppose if I told you the actual figure, we'd have to have a very different conversation. Commander James Reeves crossed his arms, the fabric of his tailored suit stretching across broad shoulders as he watched her with practiced skepticism. At 38, he'd spent 15 years in naval intelligence before being recruited to this classified division. His athletic build and conventionally handsome features made him forgettable in the best possible way, the perfect operative for gathering information unnoticed. "I've seen black sites with less security than this lab," he remarked, glancing at the triple-layered security doors they'd passed through. "Whatever you're about to show me better justify the 7 background checks I endured to get clearance." "Trust me, Commander," Dr. Hayes replied with a knowing smile. "Even your considerable imagination hasn't prepared you for this." She removed a sealed container, her movements precise and reverent. The chrome and glass cylinder seemed to emit its own subtle luminescence under the laboratory's harsh lighting. "The Chameleon Project," she continued, placing the container on a sterile workstation. "Molecular biomimetic technology that can completely reconfigure a subject's physical structure temporarily. The perfect infiltration tool for a world where biometric security has made traditional disguises obsolete." "I've heard the rumors," James replied cautiously, moving closer to examine the container. Though most of them sounded like science fiction pitched by overeager analysts who have watched too many spy movies, didn't realize we'd progressed beyond theoretical applications. Dr. Hayes smiled thinly, tucking a strand of her meticulously styled auburn hair behind one ear. "The difference between science fiction and science fact is often just adequate funding and moral flexibility. We've conducted 8 successful human trials, limited duration transformations, primarily racial and ethnic modifications. You've been selected for the first comprehensive gender transformation field test." James maintained his professional composure despite his surprise, though one eyebrow arched slightly. "I'm flattered, Doctor, but usually I prefer dinner before someone proposes to fundamentally alter my biology. Why me specifically?" "Your psychological evaluations show exceptional adaptability and identity security," Dr. Hayes replied, tapping a digital file on her tablet. "Your scores on dissociative resistance are particularly noteworthy. Simply put, Commander, you know exactly who you are, making you less likely to experience psychological fracturing during radical physical alterations. That, and your mission success rate is unparalleled in the division." "You certainly know how to flatter a man you're planning to turn into a woman," James quipped, though his eyes remained analytical, assessing the technology before him. Dr. Hayes opened the container, revealing what appeared to be a translucent, slightly iridescent membrane. It shifted with an almost liquid quality despite maintaining its form, catching the light like mother of pearl. "This is the application medium, a molecular scaffold that interfaces directly with your genetic structure to temporarily override physical expression without altering your base DNA," she explained, lifting a corner of the substance with specialized tongs. "Think of it as an exceptionally sophisticated biological disguise that works from the cellular level outward." "How temporary?" James asked, examining the substance that resembled liquid crystal more than fabric. "I'd prefer not to make a permanent career change. The current formulation maintains stability for 72 hours before breaking down, more than sufficient for your mission parameters." Dr. Hayes handed him a dossier. "Elena Kazanova, cultural attaché at the Russian consulate, has access to encryption keys we need. You'll attend a diplomatic reception as journalist Jillian Reed, make contact, and retrieve the information." James skimmed the file, years of training enabling him to process the mission details while digesting the more startling implications. His eyes flickered over photos of Casanova, an elegant woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a calculated smile. "Why not send a female operative?" he asked, closing the file. "Seems unnecessarily complicated to reconfigure my entire biology when we have perfectly capable women already on the roster. Agent Romero, for instance, has an excellent track record in diplomatic extraction scenarios." "Because Casanova is exceptionally cautious around women, especially Americans," Dr. Hayes responded, pulling up behavioral analysis data on her tablet. "She considers them professional competition and potential threats, but she has a documented weakness for sharing information with attractive male journalists, particularly after her second martini." She swiped to another screen. When her psychological profile indicated recent bisexuality, an opportunity presented itself. James raised an eyebrow. "You're sending me because she'll perceive me as less threatening as a woman while still finding me appealing enough to lower her guard. Clever, if somewhat Byzantine." "Intelligence work has always thrived in the spaces between perception and reality, Commander," Dr. Hayes replied with a smirk. "Besides, your particular combination of skills makes you uniquely qualified. Not many operatives could handle both the psychological aspects of the transformation and the delicate information extraction required." "I'm touched by your confidence," James said dryly. "Though I'm curious if you've considered the obvious risks of sending someone into the field with entirely unfamiliar physical parameters. My coordination, balance, muscle memory, everything will be affected." Dr. Hayes nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. "The transformation will be comprehensive, down to functional biology. Your muscle memory and coordination will require some adjustment, but the technology includes neural adaptation protocols that accelerate the learning curve exponentially. The more fundamental aspects of your identity, intelligence, training, tactical thinking remain completely intact." "Well," James said with a wry smile, "I've always wondered what it's like on the other side of the gender divide. Though I imagined it would involve more philosophical conversation and less molecular restructuring." Dr. Hayes handed him a medical gown. "The application process takes approximately 30 minutes. The transformation itself requires 6 hours for completion. I suggest you use the time to review the dossier thoroughly." "I'll add it to my list of unique professional experiences," James replied, accepting the gown. "Right between survived interrogation in North Korea and diffused nuclear device in Karachi." "I assure you, Commander," Dr. Hayes said with a hint of amusement, "this will rank in a category all its own." 40 minutes later, James lay on a medical table as technicians completed the final stages of applying the molecular membrane. The substance had been meticulously spread across his entire body, a second skin that gleamed faintly under the laboratory lights like morning dew on spider silk. "Comfortable?" Dr. Hayes asked, reviewing biometric readings on multiple displays surrounding the procedure area. "As comfortable as one can be when about to undergo complete biological restructuring," James replied, maintaining his sardonic tone despite the surreal circumstances. "The membrane feels strange, like wearing water. The biomimetic material is now bonding with your dermal layers," Dr. Hayes explained, monitoring vital signs. "When activated, it will systematically reconfigure your physical structure according to the programmed parameters. You'll remain conscious throughout the process, though we recommend sedation for comfort." James watched a technician adjust an IV line positioned near his arm, but not yet inserted. "What kind of discomfort are we talking about? Your briefing was notably vague on that particular detail." "Nothing comparable to actual pain," Dr. Hayes assured him. "More akin to intense pressure and the sensation of movement beneath the skin. Previous subjects described it as similar to the feeling of limbs waking up after being numb, but throughout the entire body simultaneously." "I need to experience it fully," James decided after a moment's consideration. "If I'm going to operate in the field, I need to understand exactly what happens and how it feels. No sedation." Dr. Hayes nodded, respect evident in her expression. "Most subjects opt for at least mild sedation. Your psychological resilience continues to impress." "Don't be too impressed yet," James replied. "Save the compliments for after I've actually gone through with it." "Fair enough," she conceded. then turned to the lead technician. "Remove the sedation apparatus. Commander Reeves will undergo the process with full consciousness." The technician nodded, wheeling away the IV stand. "Your vitals are stable, and the membrane has achieved optimal adhesion," Dr. Hayes announced, reviewing the final diagnostics. "Any last thoughts before we begin, Commander?" James took a deep breath, centering himself through the momentary flutter of apprehension. "Just wondering if this counts as hazard pay." Dr. Hayes smiled, initiating chameleon protocol. She pressed her palm against a biometric scanner, then entered a series of commands into the primary console. Around him, the various machines hummed to life, their pitch rising slightly as the process began. A wave of warmth spread immediately from the membrane, penetrating deeper with each heartbeat. James felt the substance seeming to dissolve, no longer a distinct layer, but merging with his own tissues. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, not painful but intensely present, as though every cell was simultaneously being analyzed and reprogrammed. "Fascinating," he murmured, watching his hand as the first microscopic changes began. "I can actually feel it working at the cellular level." Phase 1 initiating, skeletal and muscular reconfiguration, Dr. Hayes narrated, watching the molecular imaging displays. "Your bone density is being selectively reduced by approximately 15%, with simultaneous adjustments to skeletal proportions. We're starting with extremities to allow your nervous system to adapt incrementally." "Thoughtful of you," James commented, a slight strain in his voice as the sensations intensified. "Though I imagine starting with central mass would be rather disorienting." The first noticeable changes began in his extremities. James watched with clinical detachment as his hands visibly altered, fingers elongating slightly while becoming more tapered, joints becoming less pronounced as the skin smoothed and refined itself. His wrists narrowed perceptibly, the prominent veins receding beneath skin that grew incrementally softer with each passing minute. "I've spent years training these hands for precision work," he observed, flexing his increasingly delicate fingers. "Will the transformation preserve fine motor control?" "The neural mapping remains intact," Dr. Hayes assured him, adjusting a parameter on her control panel. "The physical structures are changing, but your brain's ability to manipulate them transfers completely, though you'll need to recalibrate to the new proportions and strength differentials." The transformation progressed methodically up his arms, muscles maintaining tone but losing approximately 20% of their mass, redistributing into more slender contours. His shoulders began a more dramatic narrowing, clavicles adjusting angle and proportion to create a more delicate frame. "I feel lighter," James noted, an odd sensation of weight disappearing from his upper body. "Though not necessarily weaker, different distribution rather than simple reduction." "Precisely," Dr. Hayes confirmed. "We're not simply making you smaller, we're reconfiguring your musculature for female-typical strength patterns. Women generally maintain lower upper body strength but comparable lower body power relative to their size." "Remarkable," James observed, voice steady despite the surreal experience of watching his body systematically reshape itself. "The level of precision is extraordinary. I expected something more crude." "This technology represents the integration of multiple scientific breakthroughs," Dr. Hayes said with evident pride. "Genetic manipulation, nanotechnology, synthetic biology. Billions well spent, wouldn't you agree?" "I'm reserving judgment until I see the final results," James replied, though he couldn't keep the fascination from his voice as he watched his forearm continue to reshape itself, the hair receding, the skin tone evening out to a smoother complexion. "Phase 2 initiating, facial reconfiguration," Dr. Hayes continued, adjusting monitoring equipment. "This stage includes significant soft tissue and minor skeletal alterations. You may experience unusual sensations around the sinus cavity and jaw." "By unusual, you mean?" James began, then paused as an intense pressure spread across his face. "Ah, that kind of unusual." James felt an unusual pressure across his facial structure as the changes intensified. His jawline softened visibly, angles giving way to curves as the bone and muscle reconfigured. His cheekbones became more prominent as his face subtly narrowed, creating more pronounced contours. His brow ridge reduced slightly, creating a more open appearance around eyes that remained his but now appeared larger in proportion. His nose refined itself, becoming smaller and slightly more upturned while maintaining character. His lips tingled intensely as they filled out, particularly the upper lip, which developed a more defined Cupid's bow. "The sensation reminds me of dental anesthesia," he commented, voice already showing subtle changes in resonance. "Pressure without pain." "An apt comparison," Dr. Hayes nodded. "Though considerably more sophisticated than what your dentist uses. The molecular inhibitors are selectively blocking pain responses while allowing proprioceptive feedback to remain intact." Even his ears underwent subtle refinement, becoming slightly smaller and more closely set against his head. The overall effect was a face that maintained recognizable elements of his original features while transforming them into a distinctly feminine arrangement. "Your hair follicles are now being stimulated for accelerated growth," Dr. Hayes noted as James felt a peculiar tingling across his scalp. "The programmed parameters include approximately 14 inches of length with moderate wave patterning." "Seems excessive for 72 hours, James remarked, feeling the strange sensation of weight gradually accumulating around his head as his previously short-cropped hair began extending visibly. "Though I suppose details matter for believability." "Your vocal apparatus is reconfiguring," Dr. Hayes noted as James opened his mouth to speak and produced only a soft, strained sound. "Vocal cord length and thickness adjusting, larynx repositioning. This may feel uncomfortable briefly." "That's," James attempted, then cleared his throat as his voice cracked like an adolescent boy's. "That's putting it mildly." The sensation in his throat was peculiar. A tightening followed by release as his voice settled into a higher register that sounded alien to his ears, yet emerged naturally from his transformed vocal structure. "This is disorienting," he said, the feminine voice emerging as perhaps the most psychologically jarring change yet. His speech patterns and inflections remained his own, but the tonal quality had completely transformed to a melodic contralto. "My voice, it doesn't sound like me, but it feels like me speaking." "The cognitive dissonance is perfectly normal," Dr. Hayes assured him. "Your brain recognizes the voice as originating from you, but can't reconcile it with your established self-image. The adaptation protocols will gradually minimize that disconnect." "Fascinating from a psychological perspective," James noted, still somewhat distracted by the unfamiliar sound of his own voice. "Though I wonder if complete adaptation is advisable for a temporary change. I wouldn't want to lose awareness of my baseline identity." "A valid concern," Dr. Hayes acknowledged. "But our protocols are designed to facilitate functional adaptation without identity dissolution. Your core self-concept remains stable throughout." The most dramatic phase began as the transformation reached his torso. His ribcage contracted slightly, narrowing his upper body while his waist drew inward significantly, creating a curve that his formerly straight masculine silhouette had never possessed. Simultaneously, his hips expanded outward, pelvic bones shifting with dull pops as the structure widened to create a feminine foundation. "That's intense," James commented, wincing slightly as his pelvic structure continued to reconfigure. "Not painful exactly, but certainly attention-grabbing." "Your skeletal structure is undergoing the most comprehensive reconfiguration," Dr. Hayes explained, monitoring the process closely. "The hip expansion in particular requires significant bone remodeling to achieve proper female proportions." "I can feel the center of gravity shifting," James observed, experimentally tensing various muscle groups to test the changing dynamics of his evolving form. "Lower and more centralized than I'm accustomed to. It's going to affect everything from standing to combat stance." Phase 3 initiating, primary and secondary sex characteristic reconfiguration, Dr. Hayes announced, her clinical tone helping James maintain his own detachment from the increasingly intimate changes. "This represents the most comprehensive biological restructuring of the process." The most intense sensation centered in his chest as his pectoral muscles underwent comprehensive transformation, tissue redistributing beneath the skin into perfectly formed breasts. The development felt like warm pressure expanding outward, accompanied by a network of new neural connections establishing themselves with each passing minute. "This is unexpected," James commented, looking down at his changing chest with scientific curiosity overlaying personal discomfort. "I can actually feel the neural pathways forming. The sensory input is unlike anything I've experienced." The sensory adaptation is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the technology, Dr. Hayes explained. "We're not simply changing your physical form, we're establishing the complete neurological framework necessary to process sensory information from anatomical structures you've never possessed before." When the growth stabilized, the weight of his new breasts created an entirely new awareness of his torso, a constant presence that affected balance and posture in ways he immediately began calculating and adapting to. "The weight distribution is going to take some adjustment," he noted, experimentally shifting his upper body to feel how the new mass responded to movement. "Though I suspect the neural adaptation protocols you mentioned will accelerate that learning curve. Hormonal regulation systems are now establishing," Dr. Hayes explained. "The membrane contains molecular regulators that simulate female endocrine function without requiring actual glandular transformation. You'll experience the physiological effects of estrogen dominance without permanent alterations to your endocrine system." "Will that affect cognitive function?" James asked, analytical mind still working through the implications despite the increasingly profound physical changes. "Not in the binary way popular culture might suggest," Dr. Hayes replied. "You won't suddenly develop different thinking patterns or emotional responses. However, the sensory processing may feel somewhat different, subtle shifts in how physical sensations register emotionally." James nodded, already noting subtle shifts in his emotional processing, not dramatic personality changes, but nuanced differences in how sensations registered and feelings manifested physically. The scientist in him found it fascinating, even as the operative methodically cataloged the information for mission preparation. "It's like a filter has been adjusted rather than changed entirely," he observed. "I'm still processing information as myself, but with slight variations in emphasis and attention." "An excellent analogy," Dr. Hayes agreed. "The core cognitive processes remain unchanged, but the perceptual framework shifts slightly. Many subjects report increased awareness of emotional subtext in communication, though the effect varies considerably between individuals." The final and most comprehensive phase of the transformation centered on his reproductive anatomy. James experienced an extraordinary sensation of internal reconfiguration as his male anatomy gradually reshaped itself with remarkable biological precision. External structures folded inward through a process that seemed to defy conventional surgical understanding, creating fully functional female anatomy. "The sensation is difficult to describe," James commented, maintaining clinical detachment through professional focus. "Not painful, but intensely present, like the body is remembering a form it never actually had." "That's a remarkably insightful observation," Dr. Hayes noted with genuine interest. "The biomimetic programming does essentially activate dormant genetic potential that exists in all humans. We all begin from the same embryonic template, after all. The transformation appears to be progressing more rapidly than anticipated," Dr. Hayes noted, reviewing the molecular imaging. "Your body's acceptance rate of the biomimetic programming is exceptional. We're nearly 30% ahead of projected timelines." "I've always been an overachiever," James replied with a hint of his typical dry humor, though the quip sounded distinctly different in his new feminine voice. As the hours passed, James engaged Dr. Hayes in discussions about the technology's development, the theoretical applications beyond espionage, and the philosophical implications of fluid physical identity. The conversation served both to distract from the ongoing transformation and to gather information that might prove useful during the mission. "How many people know about this project?" he asked as the 6-hour mark approached. "The security implications are staggering." "Fewer than 20 individuals have full knowledge," Dr. Hayes replied. "The technology is compartmentalized to an extreme degree, Even the scientists developing individual components weren't aware of the complete application. And yet here I am, about to walk around in public as living proof of its existence, James observed. Seems like an extraordinary risk. Which is precisely why someone with your loyalty profile was selected, Dr. Hayes countered. The potential intelligence value outweighs the security risk, particularly given the limited exposure window. 6 hours after initiation, the transformation completed. James, now physically indistinguishable from the woman he would be presenting as, sat up carefully on the medical table, immediately aware of how differently his center of gravity operated. Even this simple movement required subtle recalibration of muscle groups that functioned with altered leverage in his new form. Remarkable, he murmured, looking down at his transformed body. The level of detail is extraordinary. Dr. Hayes provided a hospital gown and assisted him to a standing position. His first steps were tentative as his brain rapidly adapted to the changed proportions and weight distribution of his body. Take your time, she advised. The neural adaptation protocols are accelerating your proprioceptive adjustments, but conscious movement will require practice. Start with basic walking before attempting anything more complex. Like running in heels, James asked with a wry smile that looked entirely different on his new feminine features. Precisely, Dr. Hayes replied. Though I suspect you'll master that particular skill more quickly than you anticipate. The adaptation algorithms are quite sophisticated. James moved carefully to the full-length mirror across the laboratory, confronting the completeness of the transformation. The woman reflected back, shared nothing physically with Commander James Reeves except the same intent expression and analytical gaze. His body had transformed into perfect feminine proportions, shoulders narrowed, waist dramatically defined, hips curved outward in classic female form. His chest now featured breasts proportionate to his frame, neither excessively large nor small, but harmonious with his overall build. His legs had lengthened slightly in proportion while developing more curved contours, particularly in the thighs. Even his feet had reduced by nearly 2 sizes, arches higher, overall shape more narrow and delicate. The face that looked back at him was strikingly attractive, but in ways entirely different from his male appearance. Softer features, fuller lips, more prominent cheekbones. His hair, previously short and dark brown, had lengthened to just past shoulder blades in soft waves of rich chestnut with subtle copper highlights. I see you've given me what they call the full package, he remarked, turning slightly to observe his profile. Rather generous in certain aspects. The parameters were calibrated for optimal mission success, Dr. Hayes replied evenly. Elena Casanova responds positively to confident, attractive women who present no obvious threat to her own considerable beauty. Your appearance is designed to register as appealing without triggering competitive instincts. Psychological manipulation through physical design, James noted. Impressive application of behavioral science. The physical transformation is comprehensive, Dr. Hayes confirmed, reviewing final scans. Molecular stability at 100%, neural integration progressing optimally. For all biological purposes, you are female for the duration of the mission. James nodded, professional training overriding the profound strangeness of the situation. How quickly can I expect to achieve normal movement patterns? I'll need to be completely convincing at the reception. Based on your adaptation rate so far, approximately 6 to 12 hours for basic movements to become natural. Fine motor control and complex physical activities may take the full 24 hours before the mission. Then we should begin immediately, James decided, straightening with determination. I'll need to practice everything from walking to conversational gestures to combat scenarios. If I'm going to be Gillian Reed for 3 days, she needs to be completely convincing down to the smallest detail. Always the perfectionist, Dr. Hayes observed with a slight smile. We have a comprehensive adaptation program ready. But first, she gestured to a set of clothing laid out in an adjacent room. Perhaps you'd like to dress in something more substantial than a hospital gown. James looked at the simple but feminine clothing with a mixture of professional interest and personal curiosity. I suppose that would be appropriate. After all, Gillian Reed would hardly attend a diplomatic function in hospital attire. Indeed, she wouldn't, Dr. Hayes agreed. Consider this your first practical exercise in adaptation. The following day was devoted entirely to adaptation training. James, now responding to Jillian to maintain mission parameters, worked with specialists to master everything from walking in heels to adjusting his fighting techniques for his transformed body's different leverage points and strength distribution. Your center of gravity is lower now, the combat instructor noted as they practiced defensive maneuvers. Use your hips more and rely less on upper body strength. You'll find you have better balance but need to compensate for reduced reach. The weight distribution changes everything, James observed, executing a modified takedown that utilized his new proportions effectively. Though I'm finding certain advantages to the lower center of gravity. Many female operatives outperform males in certain combat scenarios precisely because of those biomechanical differences, the instructor confirmed. Particularly in close-quarters situations where balance and rotational force matter more than raw strength. Throughout the day, James alternated between physical training and social adaptation, learning the subtle differences in how Jillian Reed would move through the world compared to Commander Reeves. Your stride is still too long and direct, the behavioral specialist commented during movement training. Women typically take shorter steps and navigate space differently, particularly in social settings. Old habits, James acknowledged, consciously modifying his walking pattern, though it seems inefficient. It's not about efficiency, it's about cultural expectation and biological adaptation, the specialist explained. Remember that your hip structure has changed significantly. Working with that rather than against it will appear more natural. The most challenging adjustments proved psychological rather than physical. His brain adapted rapidly to the new proprioception, but conscious awareness of his transformed body created occasional cognitive dissonance. The constant presence of breasts, the absence of male genitalia, the different sensations of clothing against more sensitive skin, all required continuous integration into his self-perception. I keep reaching for pockets that aren't there, he commented during a break in training. Women's clothing is remarkably impractical. How does anyone function with these tiny excuses for pockets? Welcome to one of femininity's many practical challenges, Dr. Hayes replied with dry amusement. Though I suspect it's the handbag you'll find most cumbersome. Men typically don't need to keep track of a separate item containing all their essentials. A tactical vulnerability I hadn't considered, James noted thoughtfully. Having essentials separated from your person creates multiple security concerns. By evening, James had mastered basic movement and social interaction patterns to a convincing degree. The neural adaptation protocols had accelerated the learning process dramatically, allowing his brain to rapidly integrate the new physical parameters. Your adaptation rate is exceptional, the behavioral specialist noted during their final assessment. Most subjects experience more significant dissociation during comprehensive transformations. James, Jillian shrugged slightly, the gesture registering differently on feminine shoulders. It's not fundamentally different from deep cover work. The physical form changes, but operational awareness remains constant. Still, the psychological resilience required is remarkable, Dr. Hayes commented as she reviewed the day's progress. You've adapted to an entirely new physicality in less than 24 hours. I'm simply applying existing skills to a new context, James replied pragmatically. Though I will admit, mastering these heels has been more challenging than certain counterinterrogation techniques I've learned. Yet you've managed admirably, Dr. Hayes observed, noting his now confident movement in the modest heels he'd been practicing with. By tomorrow, you should be ready for the field test, a controlled public environment before the actual mission. I'm looking forward to it, James said, surprising himself with the genuine interest in his voice. Field conditions always reveal adaptations needed that controlled environments miss. 72 hours after the transformation, Jillian Reed attended the diplomatic reception at the Russian consulate, moving through the crowded space with practiced ease. Her body now moved naturally in the elegant evening dress, the initial awkwardness replaced by fluid grace as neural adaptation had completed its work. She approached the bar with measured confidence, positioning herself strategically near where Alina Kazanova stood conversing with a German trade attaché. The Russian woman's attention flickered briefly toward Jillian, a momentary assessment before returning to her conversation. Vodka martini, very dry, Jillian ordered, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard by her target. With a twist. Kazanova's attention shifted again, this time with slightly more interest as she registered the drink order. James had studied her psychological profile extensively. The woman appreciated decisive choices that reflected her own preferences. Another vodka enthusiast, Kazanova commented as the German excused himself, turning toward Jillian with a measured smile. A pleasant surprise among the Americans who usually prefer their sugary cocktails. I developed an appreciation during my time in Moscow, Jillian replied smoothly, accepting her martini with a graceful nod to the bartender. Covering the post-sanctions economic summit in 2023, nothing compares to properly chilled vodka in its homeland. Kazanova's expression warmed slightly, professional interest peaked. You're a journalist. Jillian Reed, she confirmed, extending her hand in greeting. Freelance foreign policy analyst, currently gathering background for a piece on diplomatic realignments in the post-Taiwan crisis environment. The mission proceeded exactly as planned. Contact established with Kazanova, information extracted through careful conversation and strategic flirtation, objective secured without raising suspicions. Throughout the evening, James found himself drawing on aspects of his training he'd never fully appreciated before, subtle cues of body language, carefully calibrated proximity, and attentive listening that drew more information from Kazanova than direct questioning ever could. You've been most enlightening, Jillian told Kazanova as they concluded their conversation in a quiet corner of the reception. Your perspective adds considerable depth to my understanding of the situation. Perhaps we could continue our discussion in a more private setting, Kazanova suggested, her interest evident in both her expression and the hand that lingered briefly on Jillian's arm. My office has a remarkable view of the city and an excellent selection of genuine Russian vodka. Another time, perhaps, Jillian replied with carefully balanced regret and interest. I have an early meeting with the British delegation tomorrow, but I would very much like to follow up on several points you've raised. Kazanova nodded, accepting the deferral with good grace. My private number, she said, sending a contact to Jillian's phone with a discreet tap, for when your schedule allows. I'll be in touch, Jillian promised, knowing the mission parameters would never permit such follow-up, but maintaining the operational facade flawlessly. What hadn't been planned was the unexpected discovery James made during the mission. Operating in a female form offered tactical advantages he'd never considered, different social access, alternative methods of gathering information, and security assessments from a completely new perspective. By the time he returned to the safe house, he had compiled mental notes on dozens of operational insights unique to his transformed state. Mission accomplished, he reported during the security briefing, still speaking with the voice that had become natural over the past 3 days. Target information retrieved without incident. Encryption keys secured. Excellent work, Dr. Hayes replied, reviewing the preliminary data. The transformation will begin reversing within the next 6 hours as the molecular structure destabilizes. Any complications to report? James considered the question carefully. No complications, but several observations that warrant further exploration. The tactical advantages of gender-specific infiltration exceed initial projections. I believe the chameleon technology has applications beyond single-mission parameters. Meaning? Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow, her scientific curiosity evident. Meaning, I'd like to propose an extended field test. The 72-hour limitation restricts the intelligence gathering potential. If the technology could be stabilized for longer periods, the strategic advantages would be significant. You're volunteering to maintain the transformed state for an extended mission? Dr. Hayes asked, unable to completely mask her surprise. Most subjects are eager to return to their baseline form. I'm suggesting that now that the initial psychological barriers have been overcome, the operational value increases exponentially with duration. This form provides access to information networks my male identity could never penetrate. From a purely strategic perspective, the intelligence value justifies further exploration. A compelling argument, Dr. Hayes acknowledged thoughtfully. Though the molecular stability issues present significant challenges for extended transformation periods. Challenges worth addressing, given the potential applications, James countered. The perspective shift alone provides invaluable intelligence insights. The reversal process began as predicted, a gradual warming sensation spreading throughout his body as the biomimetic material began breaking down. James experienced the transformation in reverse, features resharpening, frame broadening, voice deepening, each change returning him incrementally toward his original form. The process carried its own unique sensations, distinct from the initial transformation, but equally profound. As his masculine features reasserted themselves, James maintained the observational awareness he'd cultivated throughout the mission, mentally cataloging each change with professional detachment. But 3 weeks later, he stood in the laboratory once again as technicians prepared a modified version of the chameleon membrane. The molecular stability has been extended to 30 days, Dr. Hayes explained, reviewing the updated protocols. We've also refined the neural adaptation algorithms based on data from your previous transformation. The integration should proceed more rapidly this time. James nodded, professional interest partially masking a more personal curiosity he wasn't entirely ready to examine. The mission parameters. Extended intelligence gathering at the upcoming UN conference series. Your cover identity has been expanded with additional background and credentials. She handed him the updated file. Gillian Reed, freelance journalist with specialization in international relations and diplomatic affairs. I assume Ms. Casanova will be in attendance, James asked, reviewing the mission brief with practiced efficiency. Among other high-value targets, Dr. Hayes confirmed. Your previous contact provides an excellent foundation for deeper intelligence gathering. The extended duration will allow you to develop multiple information sources concurrently. Efficient, James commented with professional appreciation. And the enhanced neural adaptation you mentioned. The second transformation typically proceeds with approximately 40% greater integration efficiency, Dr. Hayes explained. Your brain has already established the foundational pathways for the altered form. This time, you should achieve full adaptation within hours rather than days. As the application process began again, James reflected on what he discovered during his first transformation. Beyond the tactical advantages lay something more fundamental, an expanded perspective that had continued to resonate even after returning to his male form. Operating within a completely different physical framework had revealed assumptions and limitations he'd never recognized in himself or his work. Ready to begin the transformation sequence? Dr. Hayes asked as the technicians completed the application process. Ready, James confirmed, settling himself for the now familiar but still extraordinary process about to unfold. The warmth of the membrane spreading across his skin brought not apprehension, but a curious sense of anticipation. The forthcoming transformation represented not just another mission, but an opportunity to explore human experience from a vantage point few would ever know, existing authentically across the spectrum of physical form while maintaining the continuous thread of self. As the molecular reconfiguration began again, James closed his eyes and surrendered to the process, curious what new insights awaited in the space between identities.